All light, all peace, and all blessings for you. Libra.June begins with a very unusual feeling. Not physical exhaustion. Not ordinary stress. Emotional fatigue. The kind that appears after spending too much time carrying situations that never unfolded the way you hoped they would. The reading shows you looking backward more often than usual, revisiting conversations, revisiting people, revisiting expectations, revisiting chapters that never reached the ending you imagined. And honestly, that emotional weight has been following you longer than you realize. But something changes now. Because the energy repeatedly shows movement. Not explosive movement, not dramatic transformation, gradual movement, the kind that slowly introduces light into places that previously felt stuck. There is a very clear message appearing throughout the reading. Your personal light is becoming stronger, more visible, more noticeable, more powerful, and while this attracts positive opportunities, it also attracts attention. Some people celebrate your growth, some people feel inspired by it, and some become uncomfortable because your progress reminds them of what they have not yet changed in themselves. The reading urges you to maintain your elegance, your balance, your grace, because spiritual protection surrounds you throughout this period. There is also a very strong indication of professional transformation, and honestly, it begins through discomfort. You may feel restless, unsatisfied, questioning your direction, questioning your goals, questioning whether your current path is still aligned with who you are becoming. Do not fear this restlessness. The reading shows it as a sign of growth, a signal that your soul is preparing for expansion, not decline. Expansion. Trust the mystical timing of things, because June repeatedly shows situations developing behind the scenes before becoming visible in your reality. There is another powerful theme appearing. People seek you out emotionally. Very frequently, the reading shows individuals coming toward you carrying sadness, confusion, emotional exhaustion, disappointment, uncertainty, and somehow, even while tired yourself, you continue serving as a source of balance for others. People feel calmer after talking to you. People feel safer after talking to you. People feel understood after talking to you. Your presence creates emotional stability. And honestly, that is one of your greatest gifts. But there is a warning attached to this gift. You cannot continue absorbing everyone's emotions, not indefinitely. The reading repeatedly shows Libra trying to stabilize everyone else's emotional world while quietly neglecting their own. And June makes it very clear that pattern must change. You need more rest, more silence, more space, more emotional distance from problems that do not belong to you, more moments where you choose yourself. Because balance does not mean carrying the entire world. Balance means knowing what belongs to you and what does not. There is another subtle shift happening. The desire to retreat grows stronger. Not because you want isolation, because you need recovery. The reading shows a Libra who has been emotionally available for too many people for too long. And now your soul is asking for something simple. Peace. Not excitement, not intensity. Peace. The kind of peace that allows your mind to breathe again. The kind of peace that reminds you who you are beneath all the responsibilities. The kind of peace that restores your energy rather than consuming it. The chapter closes with a beautiful image. A Libra beginning to understand that emotional balance does not come from saving everyone. It comes from learning how to protect yourself with the same compassion you offer everyone else. And honestly, that lesson may become the foundation for everything that follows this month. You try very hard to behave as if certain chapters are already behind you. As if you've moved on. As if you've accepted everything. As if you've made peace with the past. But June begins revealing something that is impossible to hide from yourself any longer. There is still someone occupying far too much space inside your mind. And honestly, that realization may be uncomfortable. Because this is not simply nostalgia. The reading shows exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, the kind that comes from thinking about someone for far longer than the situation deserved. This connection appears repeatedly throughout your energy, a person who never truly brought emotional stability, a person who somehow became both a source of hope and a source of emotional depletion. One moment you tell yourself, I'm done. I need to move forward. I need to stop feeding this. And for a few hours, maybe even a few days, you genuinely believe you've reached a new level of emotional freedom. Then suddenly, something reminds you of them. A song, a memory, a photograph, a place, a conversation. And once again, they're back inside your thoughts. The reading shows this cycle repeating itself over and over. Not because you're weak, not because you're obsessed, because something remained unresolved, unfinished expectations, unspoken emotions, unanswered questions. A version of the future that never happened. And honestly, part of you is still grieving that version of the story. There is a very powerful realization approaching, one that changes everything. You begin understanding that constantly thinking about someone does not bring them closer. Thinking does not create action. Thinking does not create movement. Thinking does not create reciprocity. And while this realization initially feels painful, it becomes incredibly liberating, because for the first time, a different question begins forming inside your mind. Not, will they come back? Not, what are they feeling? Not, what could have been? Instead, the question becomes, how much more of my life am I willing to give to this? And honestly, that question changes your energy completely, because once you start asking it, you begin reclaiming your power. The reading shows your emotional focus slowly shifting, not away from love, away from waiting. There is a huge difference. You stop measuring your happiness through someone else's decisions. You stop measuring your future through someone else's hesitation. You stop measuring your worth through someone else's inability to choose. And June repeatedly shows this transformation happening. Little by little, day by day, thought by thought, there is another very strong energy appearing. Mental freedom. Not complete freedom, not yet, but the beginning of it. The reading shows you recovering pieces of yourself that became trapped inside this emotional cycle. Your concentration improves. Your motivation improves. Your emotional stability improves. Your ability to enjoy simple moments improves, because so much energy was being consumed by a story that refused to move, and now something changes. You begin moving, even if the story does not. There is another important prediction attached to this section. Someone notices the change. Someone notices that you are becoming less available emotionally, less reactive, less attached to old patterns, less willing to chase. And honestly, this creates a shift in dynamics, because people often become aware of your value the moment they realize you are no longer waiting for them. The reading does not guarantee reconciliation. It does not guarantee return, but it does show movement. And movement begins the moment you stop standing still emotionally. The spiritual lesson here is beautiful. You were never meant to build your future inside someone else's indecision. You were never meant to place your entire emotional life on hold while waiting for certainty from someone who could not provide it. You were meant to live, to grow, to expand, to experience, to create new memories, to create new possibilities, and June begins reminding you of that truth. The chapter closes with a powerful image, a Libra standing between the past and the future, one hand still touching old memories, the other reaching toward new possibilities. And for the first time in a very long while, the future begins looking more attractive than the past. There is a tremendous amount of mental energy being directed toward one area of your life right now. Money, security, stability. And honestly, the reading shows that the issue is not only financial pressure. It is the constant anticipation of financial pressure, the constant expectation that something could go wrong, the constant need to stay alert, the constant feeling that you must think 3 steps ahead of every possible problem. And that is exhausting. The reading repeatedly shows a Libra whose mind rarely gets a break. Even during moments that should be peaceful, even during moments that should feel relaxing, the concerns continue, the calculations continue, the planning continues, the worrying continues. You go to sleep thinking about responsibilities. You wake up thinking about responsibilities. You solve one problem and immediately begin preparing for the next one. And while part of this comes from being responsible, part of it comes from fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of being caught unprepared, fear of instability, fear of uncertainty. The spiritual message is very clear here. You cannot live permanently in survival mode because survival mode was designed for emergencies, not for everyday life. Yet the reading shows many Libras carrying themselves as if every day were an emergency, as if every challenge required immediate resolution, as if every uncertainty demanded immediate answers. And honestly, your nervous system is tired. Your mind is tired. Your emotional world is tired. There is another important realization approaching. You begin recognizing that excessive worry has not actually protected you. It has simply exhausted you. That realization changes everything. Because once you understand that constant anxiety is not the same thing as preparation, you begin approaching life differently. You begin breathing differently, thinking differently, responding differently. There is also a prediction here that carries extremely positive energy. The financial situation does not remain frozen. Not at all. The reading repeatedly shows movement beginning during the second half of June, not necessarily through a giant breakthrough, through gradual improvements, a conversation, an agreement, a solution, an unexpected opportunity, a payment, a project, a possibility you were not fully seeing before. And honestly, these developments begin restoring something very important, your sense of control. Because lately, part of your frustration has come from feeling trapped between responsibilities and uncertainty. Now the energy begins opening pathways. There is another fascinating message appearing. You have been focusing heavily on what could go wrong. June asks you to begin noticing what could go right, because there are opportunities surrounding you that anxiety has prevented you from fully seeing. Possibilities that fear has hidden, solutions that stress has overshadowed. The reading shows your perspective beginning to shift. And once it does, several opportunities become much easier to recognize. There is another strong indication involving work, professional movement, professional conversations, professional decisions. The energy suggests that certain frustrations you've been carrying are actually preparing you for change, not punishment, not loss, change. And often change begins with discomfort, the feeling that something no longer fits, the feeling that something no longer satisfies, the feeling that something must evolve. The reading shows exactly that process unfolding. Trust it, because your dissatisfaction is not appearing randomly. It is appearing because growth is asking for space. There is also a beautiful lesson connected to abundance, not financial abundance, emotional abundance, the ability to believe that solutions exist even when you cannot yet see them, the ability to trust that not every challenge will become a disaster, the ability to understand that uncertainty is not automatically danger. And honestly, that lesson may be more valuable than any amount of money, because once your mind stops treating every unknown as a threat, your entire life becomes lighter. The chapter closes with a powerful image, a Libra standing beneath a sky filled with unanswered questions. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, you begin feeling hopeful, because for the first time in a while, you are starting to understand something important. Not everything needs to be solved immediately for life to start moving again. Sometimes progress begins the moment you stop carrying the weight of tomorrow and return your attention to today. There is a part of you that has become extremely tired of being the only person making the effort. And honestly, June brings that truth directly to the surface. Because the reading repeatedly shows situations where you carried far more emotional responsibility than anyone else involved. You tried to understand. You tried to communicate. You tried to create peace. You tried to maintain harmony. You tried to save the connection. You tried to see the best in people, even when their actions gave you very little reason to do so. And eventually, that became exhausting. The energy shows a very specific realization happening. You begin noticing how many times you were the one initiating, the one reaching out, the one making compromises, the one choosing patience, the one giving second chances, the one carrying the emotional weight. And once you notice it, You cannot unsee it. There is a particular situation appearing very strongly. It involves someone older or someone emotionally complicated, a person connected to tension, history, misunderstandings, unresolved emotions, perhaps a family member, perhaps someone from your past, perhaps someone who always seemed difficult to reach emotionally. For a long time, this relationship felt impossible to improve, as if both sides were trapped inside old patterns. Old disappointments, old wounds, old defenses. But June begins changing something. The reading shows an unexpected softening, not perfection, not a miracle, a softening, a lowering of defenses, a willingness to communicate differently, a willingness to stop fighting old battles. And honestly, this surprises you because after so much emotional history, part of you stopped believing improvement was possible. The spiritual guidance here is very clear. Allow peace to happen. That does not mean forgetting everything. That does not mean accepting unhealthy behavior. That does not mean pretending the past never happened. It simply means refusing to carry old wars forever, because some emotional battles stopped serving you a long time ago. And June helps you recognize which ones those are. There's also a beautiful energy connected to family. One of the strongest family energies in the entire reading. The atmosphere begins improving. Communication improves, distance decreases, people reconnect. Conversations happen, visits happen, shared moments happen, and this has a powerful effect on you because Libra absorbs family energy deeply. When the environment feels tense, you feel tense. When the environment feels peaceful, you feel peaceful. And June repeatedly shows harmony increasing around you. Not perfectly, but noticeably. There is another major realization emerging. Perhaps one of the biggest lessons of the month. You have spent too much of your life trying to keep everyone else comfortable. And while your intentions were beautiful, the cost has been enormous because every time you ignored your own needs, every time you ignored your own exhaustion, every time you ignored your own feelings, you paid a price emotionally. The reading shows a sentence forming clearly inside your mind. I need to start thinking about myself too. And honestly, that sentence is not selfish. It is necessary because your emotional reserves are not infinite. Your energy is not infinite. Your patience is not infinite. And June begins teaching you that protecting yourself is not a betrayal of anyone else. It is an act of self-respect. There is also a powerful spiritual awakening taking place. You begin seeing people more clearly, who drains your energy, who restores your energy, who only appears when they need something, who genuinely cares, who celebrates your growth, who secretly resents it. These realizations arrive quietly, but once they arrive, everything changes. Because Libra often takes longer than others to accept uncomfortable truths. But once you finally accept them, you never view the situation the same way again. The chapter closes with a powerful image. A Libra stepping out of the role of emotional caretaker for everyone else and stepping into a new role. Someone who still loves deeply, still cares deeply, still supports others, but finally understands that their own peace deserves protection too. And honestly, that realization changes every relationship in your life moving forward. Now the reading begins entering one of the most delicate areas of your life, love. And honestly, the energy here is not showing a lack of feeling. It is showing emotional exhaustion. There is a huge difference, because despite everything you've experienced, you still believe in love. You still believe in connection. You still believe in reciprocity. You still believe that one day someone can genuinely choose to stay. The problem is not hope. The problem is how tired you've become. The reading shows a Libra standing between two emotional worlds. One part of you still wants something beautiful, something intense, something genuine, something peaceful, something that feels effortless and real. But another part of you remembers everything you've already endured. The waiting, the uncertainty, the confusion, the mixed signals, the emotional inconsistency. And because of that, a conflict begins appearing inside you. Some days you feel completely open to love. Other days you wonder if it is even worth trying again. The reading shows this emotional oscillation very clearly. There is also one person appearing repeatedly, a specific person, someone who continues influencing your emotional energy. And the most interesting part, the connection is not one-sided. The reading shows this person thinking about you too, feeling something too, carrying emotions too. But there is a problem. Movement is missing. Action is missing. The energy repeatedly shows someone who feels deeply but acts slowly, someone who cares but hesitates, someone who wants but delays, someone who thinks but rarely moves. And honestly, that dynamic has exhausted you. Because Libra needs movement, you need reciprocity, you need signs that something is actually progressing, not endless emotional limbo, not endless uncertainty, not endless waiting. The reading delivers an important message here. This story does not appear completely finished. The emotional bond remains active. The connection remains alive. The energy remains present. But June begins changing your role inside the story. You stop living exclusively in expectation. You stop spending every day waiting for movement. You stop making this person the center of your emotional universe. And honestly, that changes everything. Because while your attention was locked onto this situation, you stopped noticing how much life was happening around you. Now the energy begins returning to you. Your attention returns to you. Your happiness returns to you. Your possibilities return to you. There is another beautiful prediction appearing. Your attractiveness increases significantly during this period. And no, this is not only about physical appearance, it is about energy, presence, confidence, magnetism. The reading shows people noticing you, watching you, observing you, becoming curious about you. Through social media, through social circles, through mutual friends, through unexpected encounters. And honestly, part of you does not fully believe it yet, because disappointment made you question your own magnetism, made you question your own appeal, made you question whether people still notice you. June begins proving otherwise, very clearly. There is even a strong possibility of someone becoming interested in you surprisingly fast. The energy shows direct attention, effort, interest, curiosity, someone who wants to know more, someone who wants access to your world, someone who is not afraid to show it. But there is an important lesson attached to this opportunity. You cannot remain emotionally unavailable forever. This message appears repeatedly because there is a difference between protecting your heart and locking it away completely. The reading shows moments where you feel something, yet pretend you do not. You become interested, yet act indifferent. You become curious, yet remain silent. And honestly, that pattern has cost you opportunities before. June begins asking for authenticity, not desperation, not chasing. Authenticity. You do not need to run after anyone, but you also do not need to make people guess everything you feel, because real connection requires participation from both sides. The chapter closes with a powerful image, a Libra standing at the doorway of a new emotional chapter, someone who still carries scars from the past, but who is slowly remembering that those scars were never meant to become permanent walls. And as June continues unfolding, love begins moving again, not through games, not through confusion, not through endless waiting, through honesty, through presence, through truth. You know what the biggest problem in your love life has become? It is not a lack of opportunities, dot. It is not a lack of feelings, dot. It is not bad luck, dot. It is emotional exhaustion, dot. And honestly, this realization changes everything, dot. Because the reading shows a Libra who has spent so much time navigating complicated emotional situations that part of you has unconsciously started associating love with suffering, love with waiting, love with uncertainty, love with confusion, love with anxiety, love with disappointment. And June begins breaking that association apart. The reading shows a very clear internal conflict. One side of you still wants deep connection, still wants romance, still wants companionship, still wants someone to genuinely choose you. But another side immediately remembers everything you have already survived emotionally, the unanswered messages, the inconsistent behavior, the mixed signals, the emotional distance, the false hope, the uncertainty. And because of that, every time your heart moves forward, fear quietly pulls it back. The reading repeatedly shows this pattern. You become interested, then cautious. You become hopeful, then skeptical. You become emotionally available, then protective again. And honestly, it is understandable. But June begins asking a difficult question. How long will you allow past disappointments to decide your future? Because there is something very important appearing in your energy. Awareness. The kind of awareness that changes self-esteem. You begin recognizing that many of the people you invested in were emotionally unavailable from the beginning. People who enjoyed attention, people who enjoyed being desired, people who enjoyed your presence, people who enjoyed your affection, but people who never truly intended to build something stable. And honestly, this realization is liberating because you stop asking, what was wrong with me? And begin asking, why was I trying to build something with someone who never wanted to build? That shift changes everything. There is another beautiful energy emerging, reciprocity. The reading repeatedly shows Libra understanding how important reciprocity truly is. Because when affection flows both ways, you flourish. You become lighter, more confident, more expressive, more emotionally alive. But when affection becomes one-sided, you slowly begin shrinking emotionally without even realizing it. The reading shows June introducing a different type of energy. Less confusion, less emotional games, less inconsistency, more directness, more honesty, more effort, more clarity. And honestly, at first this feels strange because after spending so much time around complicated people, healthy behavior almost feels unfamiliar. The reading shows someone entering your energy who communicates more clearly than what you're used to, someone who shows interest openly, someone who reaches out, someone who creates opportunities, someone who actually demonstrates their intentions through actions. And the interesting part? This person is not subtle. The energy shows persistence, effort, presence, a willingness to pursue. But there is one condition attached to this opportunity. You must participate. Because the reading shows a tendency to hide your feelings, to protect your emotions, to wait for absolute certainty, to remain silent even when interest exists. And June repeatedly delivers a powerful message. You do not need to appear emotionally cold to have value. Read that again. Because this lesson changes everything. Many opportunities from your past did not disappear because there was no chemistry. They disappeared because nobody truly knew what you felt. The walls were too high, the signals were too hidden, the vulnerability never arrived, and now the universe is encouraging a different approach. Not recklessness, not emotional dependence, authenticity, because genuine connection cannot grow in complete emotional darkness. There is another prediction here that feels incredibly important. Your confidence begins returning, slowly, naturally, without force, without performance. You begin remembering that your value was never determined by who stayed or who left. You begin remembering that your attractiveness was never determined by one person's inability to choose you. You begin remembering who you are. And honestly, that changes your entire emotional frequency. The chapter closes with a beautiful image, a Libra standing at the edge of a new emotional chapter, someone who is finally becoming tired of emotional confusion, someone who is finally recognizing their own worth, someone who is slowly learning that love should not constantly feel like work. And as this realization deepens, the people you attract begin changing too. There is something June is going to force you to face, Dot. And honestly, you can no longer pretend it does not affect you, Dot. Because for a very long time, you mastered the art of appearing emotionally balanced, Dot. Even when you were hurting, Dot. Even when you were disappointed, Dot. Even when you were exhausted. Even when you felt completely overwhelmed. You continued smiling, continued helping, continued listening, continued carrying yourself with grace. But the reading shows something changing now. You are finally becoming honest with yourself. And that honesty becomes one of the most important turning points of the entire month. There is a phrase appearing repeatedly throughout this section. I am tired. Not physically, emotionally. Tired of waiting for reciprocity. tired of trying to understand emotionally unavailable people, tired of carrying relationships alone, tired of hoping that inconsistency will eventually become consistency, tired of making excuses for people who never truly showed up. And honestly, this recognition is healthy because while you were pretending everything was fine, you continued accepting situations that were quietly stealing your peace. Now something changes. You stop minimizing your own pain. You stop dismissing your own needs. You stop pretending certain situations did not affect you. And once you do that, healing finally begins. There is another very strong energy appearing. Regret, but not necessarily romantic regret. The reading shows reflection around choices, places where you stayed too long, people you invested in for too long, situations where your intuition warned you and you ignored it, situations where your heart already knew the answer, but you continued hoping for a different outcome. And honestly, these memories return strongly throughout June. But the purpose is not punishment. The purpose is understanding, because for the first time, you begin realizing something important. Those experiences were not wasted, painful, yes, disappointing, absolutely, but wasted, no. The lessons changed you. The lessons strengthened you. The lessons prepared you. And June repeatedly shows you recognizing that truth. There is another powerful spiritual message emerging. You are closing a very heavy emotional cycle, not instantly, not dramatically, gradually. The reading shows the process clearly. First comes exhaustion, then emotional distance, then acceptance, then peace. Many Libras are currently somewhere in the middle of this process. You are not fully free yet, but you are no longer where you used to be. And honestly, that matters. Because progress is still progress, even when it happens slowly. There is also a beautiful prediction connected to movement. Physical movement, social movement, new environments, new experiences, new conversations. The reading repeatedly shows Libra leaving the house more often, exploring more, connecting more, being visible again, and this becomes incredibly important. Because isolation keeps feeding old stories. Movement creates new ones. The more you remain alone with old memories, the more powerful they become. The more you engage with life, the weaker those memories become. There is even a strong indication that an important connection begins through something surprisingly simple. A casual conversation, a random interaction, an unexpected invitation, a brief encounter. Something that initially appears insignificant, but carries potential. And the most beautiful part? This energy feels different from what you've experienced before. The reading repeatedly emphasizes one word: ease. Not anxiety, not confusion, not emotional chaos. Ease, a connection that feels natural, comfortable, safe, and honestly, that may feel unfamiliar at first because you've spent so much time associating intensity with importance. June begins teaching you something different. Peace can be powerful too. There is another lesson that appears repeatedly. Stop romanticizing emotional absence. Because for too long, part of you confused distance with mystery. Confused coldness with maturity. Confused difficulty with depth. Confused suffering with love. And honestly, that belief has cost you happiness. The reading shows this illusion breaking apart. You begin seeing value in people who stay. People who communicate, people who make effort, people who show up consistently, people who create stability. And once that shift happens, your entire emotional world begins changing. The chapter closes with a beautiful image. A Libra slowly walking away from relationships that fed anxiety and moving toward connections that create peace. And honestly, that single decision changes everything. There is a very quiet change happening inside you. Now, and honestly, most people around you have not noticed it yet. But you have Because something that once felt impossible is slowly becoming reality. You are starting to lose your fear of letting certain people go. And that changes everything. For a long time, Libra remained emotionally connected to situations that no longer brought peace. Not because the connection was healthy, because feelings still existed, because hope still existed, because part of you kept believing things might eventually change. And honestly, You gave more chances than most people would have. You waited longer than most people would have. You understood more than most people would have. But June begins bringing a new awareness, a powerful awareness. Love alone cannot sustain everything. The reading repeats this message several times because genuine connection requires more than feelings. It requires reciprocity, consistency, effort, presence, mutual intention. And when those things are missing, even strong feelings eventually become exhausting. There is a moment appearing in the reading where you look at a certain situation and think, I really tried. And honestly, you did, more than anyone realizes. You invested energy, time, patience, hope, understanding. You carried possibilities long after many people would have walked away. But now something shifts. The energy shows emotional liberation beginning, not coldness, not indifference. Liberation. The kind that happens when someone finally understands that they cannot continue sacrificing their peace to maintain a connection with someone who remains undecided. And honestly, that realization brings maturity, a tremendous amount of maturity. There is another powerful prediction appearing. Your love life begins changing the moment you stop focusing all your energy on people who do not know what they want. Read that again, because this message appears repeatedly. The reading shows something fascinating. There are people interested in you, people observing you, people noticing you, people feeling drawn toward your energy. But your attention remained fixed on old disappointments for so long that you barely noticed them. While you focused on what wasn't moving, you missed what was trying to approach. June begins reversing that. Your attention starts shifting. Your energy starts shifting. Your openness starts shifting. And because of that, new possibilities become visible. There is one particular energy appearing very strongly. Someone who admires you quietly. Someone who has been paying attention longer than you realize. The reading shows a person who appreciates your kindness, your intelligence, your emotional depth, your elegance, your ability to remain compassionate even after difficult experiences. And honestly, their interest feels genuine. Not superficial, not temporary, genuine. But there is one challenge. This person is uncertain whether you are emotionally available because Libra became very skilled at hiding feelings, very skilled at protecting vulnerability, very skilled at appearing fine even when carrying enormous emotions internally. And sometimes people mistake that self-protection for disinterest. The reading encourages authenticity, not exposure, not emotional recklessness, authenticity, because genuine opportunities need space to grow. There is also a beautiful shift happening around self-esteem. You begin feeling attractive again, interesting again, desired again, valuable again. And honestly, this matters more than you realize, because disappointment has a way of making people question themselves, question their worth, question their appeal, question whether anyone truly sees them anymore. June begins proving that those doubts were never accurate. Your energy becomes brighter, more magnetic, more noticeable, and people respond to it. There is another lesson that appears with extraordinary strength. Stop turning suffering into proof of love, because the reading shows a pattern that has followed you for years, waiting too long, understanding too much, accepting too much, forgiving too much, carrying too much. And somewhere along the way, part of you started believing that love was supposed to feel heavy, supposed to feel difficult, supposed to feel painful. June begins dismantling that belief, because real connection does not require constant emotional suffering. Real connection creates safety, stability, comfort, growth. And the more you understand that, the more your relationships begin changing. The chapter closes with a powerful image. A Libra walking away from emotional breadcrumbs, walking away from uncertainty, walking away from situations that survive only through hope, and opening the door to something very different, something mutual, something honest, something peaceful. And honestly, that may be the most beautiful transformation of all. As the cycle begins approaching its conclusion, the reading reveals one of the most important transformations of your entire year. And honestly, it has very little to do with another person. It has everything to do with you. Because for the first time in a long while, Libra begins remembering their own value. Not intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, deeply, and that changes everything. The reading repeatedly shows a person who spent too much time accepting less than they deserved simply because they did not want to lose people. You accepted delays. You accepted indecision. You accepted inconsistency. You accepted emotional distance. You accepted one-sided effort, not because you lacked self-respect, because you cared. Because you believed, because you hoped. But June begins bringing a very different awareness. You start realizing that preserving your peace is more important than preserving every relationship. And honestly, that realization creates enormous freedom. There is a phrase appearing repeatedly throughout this section: I deserve reciprocity. Simple, direct, powerful. Because for years, part of you kept trying to earn what should have been offered freely. Attention, effort, presence, communication, consistency, and now something changes. You stop trying to convince people to choose you. You stop trying to prove your value. You stop trying to maintain connections that survive only because of your effort. And honestly, that shift feels liberating. There is another beautiful energy emerging. Hope. Real hope. Not hope attached to a specific person. Not hope attached to a specific outcome. Hope attached to life itself. Because the reading shows your emotional world becoming lighter. Not perfect. Lighter. The weight you've been carrying begins decreasing. The constant overthinking begins decreasing. The emotional attachment to old disappointments begins decreasing. And little by little, something returns. Excitement, curiosity, possibility. The desire to experience life again, the desire to trust again, the desire to love again. And honestly, that may be one of the most important victories of all. There is another very strong prediction connected to your future. The reading shows opportunities approaching. Not only romantic opportunities, life opportunities. New environments, new friendships, new conversations, new experiences, new chapters, and the most beautiful part, these opportunities appear because you finally create space for them. Because for too long, your emotional world was occupied by stories that were no longer moving. Now space begins opening and life begins filling that space. There is another fascinating realization. You begin understanding that some people were lessons, not destinations. They arrived to teach, to reveal, to strengthen, to awaken, but they were never meant to stay forever. And honestly, accepting the truth brings peace, because once you stop trying to force every story into a lifelong chapter, you begin appreciating what each experience actually gave you. There is also a powerful spiritual message appearing. Stop measuring your future through your past disappointments, because the reading repeatedly shows moments where old pain tries to convince you that future happiness will end the same way. But June challenges that belief. Not everyone is the same. Not every story repeats. Not every connection ends in disappointment. Not every chapter ends in loss. And the more you allow yourself to believe that, the more life begins surprising you. There is another beautiful indication that your confidence continues growing. Not loud confidence, not performative confidence. The quiet confidence of someone who finally understands their own worth. The confidence of someone who no longer feels the need to chase. The confidence of someone who no longer fears walking away. The confidence of someone who knows exactly what they bring into every relationship. And honestly, that confidence becomes magnetic. People notice it. People respond to it. People respect it. The chapter closes with a powerful image. A Libra standing at the edge of a completely different emotional future. Someone who is no longer living in survival mode. Someone who is no longer defining themselves through old disappointments. Someone who is finally beginning to believe that peace, love, and reciprocity are not impossible dreams. They are standards. And once you understand that, everything changes. As this reading reaches its conclusion, there is one final message that rises above everything else. And honestly, it may be the most important message of the entire month. Because after all the emotional lessons, all the relationship shifts, all the financial concerns, all the spiritual growth, all the disappointments, and all the healing, June is ultimately about one thing: you learning how to believe in your life again. The reading shows something that many people around you never fully saw. There were moments when your light became dimmer, not because you stopped caring, not because you stopped trying, not because you stopped dreaming, because you became tired, emotionally tired, the kind of tiredness that accumulates slowly. Month after month, disappointment after disappointment, expectation after expectation, you continued moving, continued working, continued smiling, continued fulfilling responsibilities. But internally, part of you felt heavier than it should have. And honestly, that weight has been affecting more areas of your life than you realized. But June begins bringing movement, not dramatic movement, not overnight transformation, something much more powerful. Real movement, the kind that begins through small changes, a conversation, a new opportunity, a financial improvement, a peaceful moment, an unexpected connection, someone showing genuine interest, a problem finally finding a solution, a burden finally becoming lighter, and little by little, those small changes begin restoring something important: hope. There is another very powerful realization appearing. You begin understanding your own emotional value, perhaps for the first time in years. Because for a long time, you accepted very little simply because you feared losing people. You accepted delays, indecision, distance, inconsistency, emotional breadcrumbs. Situations where you were giving far more than you were receiving, and now something changes. You stop negotiating your worth, you stop lowering your standards, you stop convincing yourself that minimal effort should be enough. The reading repeatedly shows a new awareness emerging. You deserve reciprocity. You deserve presence. You deserve consistency. You deserve someone who chooses you willingly, not someone who must constantly be convinced. And honestly, that realization transforms your entire emotional future. There is also a beautiful energy connected to self-reconnection. The reading shows you returning to yourself, taking better care of yourself, paying more attention to your needs, recovering confidence, recovering enthusiasm, recovering curiosity about life, recovering the desire to experience new things. And this has a tremendous effect on your energy. Because when Libra begins feeling alive emotionally again, your natural magnetism returns immediately. People notice, opportunities notice, life notices. The reading repeatedly shows your energy becoming brighter, lighter, more attractive, more open, more hopeful. There is another message that appears with incredible strength. Stop believing your sensitivity is a weakness, because one of the biggest misunderstandings of your life has been this: the very thing that caused some of your pain is also one of your greatest gifts. You feel deeply, you perceive deeply, you love deeply, you understand people deeply. Even after disappointments, you still maintain the ability to believe in goodness. And honestly, that is not weakness. That is humanity. That is strength. That is spiritual maturity. The reading also shows a period of emotional reorganization continuing throughout the weeks ahead. Some people move away. Some people move closer. Some stories lose power. Some stories begin. Some doors close. Some doors open. But above all else, you stop living in emotional survival mode. And that may be the greatest transformation of all, because survival is not living. Survival is enduring, and June begins guiding you back toward living, back toward possibility, back toward trust, back toward joy. The final image surrounding your reading is beautiful. A Libra who spent years trying to balance everyone else's emotions, finally learning how to balance their own. A Libra who becomes stronger without becoming harder, more selective without becoming cold, more intuitive without becoming fearful, more confident without becoming distant. And perhaps most importantly, a Libra who finally understands that peace, love, respect, and reciprocity are not luxuries. They are necessities. And once your soul fully accepts that truth, your entire life begins changing. Because the future waiting for you is not built upon old disappointments, it is built upon everything you learned from them. And honestly, you are far more ready for that future than you realize, Libra.